state of Delaware and in Illinois as well. As we keep emphasizing here, 0 surprises so far. They've got to get to 270. The key races, key states we're watching at the moment would be Florida, where polls have closed, North Carolina, and Georgia as well. And not really a surprise here. Over in the Granite State, the AP is calling it for the incumbent, Jeanne Shaheen. She was seeking her 3rd term in Washington. She has been in office since 2009 in New Hampshire. The Republican Corky Messner has about 32% of the vote. Libertarian Justin O'Donnell coming in at about 2% of the vote. Again, the AP calling this one for the incumbent, Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Let's turn now to the presidential election, where after spending the day in Pennsylvania, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is now in his home state of Delaware. He's set to speak outside the Chase Center in Wilmington tonight, and that is where we find our national correspondent, Atra El-Nashar. Atra.
Hey, good evening. Well, right now we know that Joe Biden is actually at home here in Delaware, watching the returns with his family, as so many Americans are doing right at this very minute. And you just mentioned some of the key states that we're watching as these early returns start to come in. But what I'm hearing is that the Biden campaign is keeping an eye specifically on Florida, of course, the swingiest of swing states, but also Michigan. It's a state that the Biden campaign feels is well within their reach. It's a state that went to former President Obama twice and then to President Trump in 2016, but only by about 10,000 votes or so. And it's a state where they've put a lot of ground game into in these last few days. Senator Kamala Harris was there just today in Detroit getting out the vote. As for Florida, you know, it's a state with a long history of keeping us on our toes as far as presidential elections go. And right now it really, couldn't be closer. But it is a state that's been counting their absentee ballots for weeks. So they are one of the few states that will give us a clear indication of how that state is going. It's not going to keep us up too late if you're just keeping your eye on Florida. Texas is also one that could potentially be in play for Democrats this year, only because turnout has been so massive in that state.
And Atra, what's been Biden's focus in these last few days and hours really at the end of the campaign?
The pandemic and healthcare. Those are 2 issues that Democrats see as winning issues for them up and down the ticket. But more broadly, putting policy aside, Joe Biden has been focusing on the same message he launched his campaign on, and that's restoring the soul of the nation, as he puts in his own words. It's something that really, I think, can resonate with a lot of Americans tonight. As you may be seeing in your towns, there are businesses boarding up. We traveled here from Washington, D.C., where there are a lot of government buildings doing the same. And there's a lot of worries across the country tonight that there could be unrest or potentially violence or looting and things of that nature. So when we do hear from Joe Biden, whether it's tonight or the early hours of Wednesday morning, expect to hear a message of calm, of unity, and of patience, because we could be watching these returns for quite some time.
All right, Atra, thank you, and we'll continue to monitor the race all throughout the night. All right, Atra El-Nashar in Delaware. Thank you so much. And coming up, we will also be checking in with national correspondent James Rosen, who is in Washington, D.C. He is following President Trump's election night, so we'll be hearing from them later on as well. And we do want to bring in our political analyst for the night, Andy Rudalevich. He is the Thomas Brackett Reed Professor of Government at Bowdoin College. He's joined us on past election nights, and we do want to thank Andy for being with us tonight.
It's great to be with you.
And Andy, so many states, as we've already alluded to, that we're watching tonight, including our own right here in Maine. Mm-hmm. What are you paying particular attention to right now?
Well, I think we're trying to figure out if this is going to be a short night or a long week. We are looking, of course, at Florida, as was just mentioned, trying to figure out if the Biden campaign's investment in Florida can flip that state back to the Democrats after President Trump won it and has spent a lot of time. He's now even a Florida resident, right, for voting purposes. So a lot of attention by both campaigns. If Florida were to flip, that would make President Trump's pathway back to the White House much harder. We're also, of course, looking at Georgia, North Carolina, states that President Trump won. Again, if any of them go to Biden, that might be a good night for the Democrats. We are seeing, though, so far, mostly things that we would have expected. Despite a whole bunch of money spent in Kentucky, for example, Senator McConnell seems to have won that race quite easily. And he, of course, is hoping to remain majority leader rather than being bumped to a rather less nice office on the minority side of the Capitol.
Yeah, and if there's one state that the Democrats likely would have liked to pick off, it would have been Mitch McConnell's seat in Kentucky, even if it was a long shot. And how about here in Maine, Andy? I know that we've been talking already about how Maine can split its electoral votes. We saw the 2nd district, that one electoral vote, which who knows could be important, went to Trump in 2016. What's your vibe on this right now? What are you sort of looking at when it comes to Maine's outcomes?
Yeah, well, obviously it's going to be close. Turnout has been very high. A lot of enthusiasm about the race, and of course, a lot of it was early, depending where you were on the state today. You know, some of the lines at the polls were really not that long, partly because so many people had voted in advance of today. In the 2nd district, you know, we've seen some conflicting polling. The sample size for those polls is so small that it's really hard to know whether they are reliable or not. We've seen everything from an 8-point Trump lead to a 7 or 8 point Trump deficit up there. Certainly Jared Golden has looked pretty solid in his first defense of that seat. That could bode well for Biden there, just taking that one extra vote away from President Trump. As you say, you could come up with a quasi-plausible map where that vote is the difference in the election. Yeah, we'll be intrigued to see that. Of course, in Maine, as already mentioned, ranked choice voting is going to make a big difference. It could happen there. And of course, we're talking about Senator McConnell's hope to remain majority leader. Susan Collins's race may be the key element there, too. And we may not know what that outcome is until the ranked choice process plays out, which means maybe a week.
Right.
Maybe more.
And you talked about, you know, ranked choice voting. Maine is going to be the first state in the country to use ranked choice voting in a presidential race. How big is that?
Well, again, it could matter, especially in the 2nd district. I think it's unlikely that President Trump will keep Joe Biden under 50% in the 1st district, you know, south of Augusta. But, you know, you could think of a scenario where the 3rd, 4th, and 5th candidates on the main ballot for president wind up mattering in that 2nd district, right? If there are libertarian votes, for example, that are, you know, casting a little bit of a protest vote, but in the end might come back to President Trump, ranked choice could matter for that last electoral vote as well.
And we're pleased to be joined, in case you're just joining us, by Thomas Brackett-Reed, professor of government at Bowdoin College, author, and analyst extraordinaire Andy Ridlevich. Andy, stick around. We'll be talking to you a lot, I think, throughout the evening.
Looking forward to it.
And we do want to send it back to John, who is at the live desk. John.
Yeah, some great insight there. Thanks so much for that. And of course, we have been talking about this election now for a long time. We all want some quick results, some really valuable insight there. Of course, a few states are called, but also giving us some insight at this point are some national exit polls, which show some of the top issues driving voters this year. And this is some of that preliminary survey data of nearly 12,000 voters at more than 100 polling locations at this point. So about a third of voters say the economy is the most important issue. 1 in 5 cite racial inequality, and less than 20% say the coronavirus pandemic is the most important issue to their vote. And another question that was asked at the polls, exit polls, is what's more important to you now, containing the virus or rebuilding the economy? 52% were saying that containing the virus is most important. And regarding the efforts to control the virus, one of the questions was, how are those efforts going at this point? And 48% of people who were part of this exit poll say things are going well, and 51% say badly. So obviously voters are divided over the key issues, just like they are about the candidates. I also want to mention this new AP survey that is just coming in just a few minutes ago, and it's a snapshot here. It asked about the race for the Senate, and voters under 45 in this one were more likely to back Sarah Gideon, but Collins and Gideon are about tied among older voters. And here in Maine, the pandemic is top of mind. 44% said it's the most important issue facing the country today. So that's what we got for now, and we'll continue to watch as things are coming in here, but we just wanted to pass along some of that insight that we're getting from the exit polls at this point. And Greg, I know you followed these for a while. Any big surprises there for you at this point?
No, I love the snapshots, John. As we talk about these exit polls, again, the important thing here is that we're talking about things, these are what actual voters are saying as they come out, and they try to get obviously a large enough sample size in important certain districts, there's sort of this arcane science that comes into exactly which places they're conducting these exit polls to try and get a real interesting sample of people. But I think, John, that stood out to me. I'm not surprised at all to hear that the pandemic is high on people's mind. And Jen, we were talking about that as well. But interesting when it comes to that split between younger and older voters, to be honest, I actually thought, maybe Jen, you agree with me, the older voters might have even skewed more to Collins than what you're hearing in that exit poll.
That is what I was just thinking, knowing some of the older people in my life. But yeah, I was really interested to hear that. And of course, the pandemic top of mind, I think, for all of us, especially with just the way that we're doing things today. It's impacted everything.
Yeah, one thing that was interesting was how 44% of voters here in Maine in this survey said that they were very interested in the pandemic. And as far as nationally, that number drops to less than 20% saying coronavirus and the pandemic are the most important issues to their vote.
All right, John, thanks so much. Hey, I want to tell our viewers who are watching us on Facebook and on WGME.com, we're going to be doing these simulcasting live on air on occasion, and we've just been told we're about 45 seconds or so away from going up live on CBS 13. So if you're watching us online, you hear us reference that, that's because we're actually live on TV for 3 or 4 minutes at a time as well. Hey, polls did close in New Hampshire about a half an hour or so ago at 7 o'clock. Right now in the presidential race there in New Hampshire, still too close to call, but we do want to say New Hampshire is one of those states that has swung back and forth in a very close one that we're watching.
And also in the Granite State, the race for Senate, the incumbent Jean Shaheen, the AP has called that one for Shaheen. She will apparently be keeping her seat in the Senate. She has been there since 2009, so really no surprise on that one.
And again, the next, we understand Susan Collins will be talking in just a moment. Again, the next words you hear us speak are going to be on CBS 13 as well. So stand by until we get a cue that we're live on CBS 13. And good evening. This is a CBS 13 News special election update. You are joining us here live on the air. I am Greg Lagerquist.
And I'm Jennifer Long. The polls are closed at this point, and we are starting to see the results coming in Maine and across the country.
And that includes races in the state, which includes the state house districts, the 2 congressional districts. We're also watching the race for the Senate. We've got John Krisos at the live desk tonight. We also understand that we're in just a moment, we're ready to go live. Just taking the stage, that's Susan Collins in Bangor. Let's go ahead and listen in. Susan Collins just addressing the crowd up there, outside socially distanced, or at least mostly so. Let's listen in.
I'm just delighted to be here tonight with all of you. Together, we are Team Collins. And what a team it is. You know, when we made the decision, when Tom and I talked about my running again, I knew that this would be a tough race. And my opponent certainly has thrown everything at me but the kitchen sink. In fact, I think that's coming next. Stay tuned. The other side thought that they could come to me and just run negative ads, dump loads and loads, millions and millions of dollars of money, and just buy this Senate seat. But is that the main way? No, it certainly is not. And we've never backed down. We've never given, because that is what we Mainers do. We work hard, we show up for work every day, and we get the job done, no matter how hard it may be. Throughout throughout all of this extraordinary campaign, I have been strengthened every day by the support and hard work of each and every one of you. I am so grateful to you. All of you have played such a critical role in my campaign. Well, I wish that I could thank each of you by name. That would take all night. On the other hand, we may be here all night. But I am so grateful to all of you, and please know that my gratitude extends to each and every one of you who is here tonight in our COVID-compliant party, and all of you who are watching from home. I'm so grateful. First, let me thank my husband, Tom Davron. Tom has put up with so much, and I am so grateful. Tom, tonight, we can finally go to bed without watching those negative ads. You're no longer going to have to switch to watch the Canadian Broadcasting Company. And I'm just so grateful for your love, your advice, and your support. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. So my 93-year-old mother, whom I saw at breakfast this morning in Caribou, is watching from Caribou. I thank her so much. Thank you, Mom, for teaching me the values of working hard, keeping my commitments, acting with integrity, and serving others. I could not have had better role models than my parents. All three of my brothers, Mike, Sam, and Greg, have joined us tonight. Thank you so much for being here. Along with my sisters-in-law, Debbie, Lise, and Lori, and my wonderful nieces, nephew. There are others that are watching from afar. I'm so grateful that you are all here tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you. I want to thank my campaign chairman. That is Ann Robinson and Josh Tardy. They provided great leadership, terrific advice, always kept us on track. Thank you, Ann and Josh. Thank you. My extraordinary finance chairman, Sam Ladd. Sam raised $500,000 for me in the great state of Maine. I'm so thankful to him. He's got a great Rolodex. And my treasurer, Betsy McCandless. What a great friend Betsy is. Thank you so much. She also deserves my heartfelt thanks. I want especially to thank Steve Abbott, my longtime chief of staff, my campaign manager, and most of all, my dear friend. Thank you, Steve. And Amy Abbott, who led our fundraising operation. That was extraordinary. We raised more than we have ever raised. And the entire campaign team, I could not have had a better, more hardworking campaign staff. Thank you, each and every one of you. But I don't want to forget my federal staff, who for years have helped literally tens of thousands of Mainers with problems with federal agencies, communities across our state, with economic development projects, anyone who needed help. They were always there in my 6 constituent service centers. Thank you so much for all that you have done. You know, it's because we get it. It's not about politics, it's about Maine and Mainers. So you may have noticed those great buses that we have. We have, one is from Sear Bus Line, one is from VIP Bus Line. I want to thank my dear friends Sue and Joe Sear, Jason Briggs for doing all of that. They look great. So listen to this. We have just completed my All of Maine bus tour. It's my favorite part of the campaign. We have been from Rangeley in the west to Eastport in the east, from Kittery in the south to Fort Kent in the north. We have visited 80 communities talking to Mainers where they live, where they work, where they play. We have traveled 6,500 miles. And all along the way, I have been so heartened to speak with so many wonderful Maine people, to listen to your stories and to talk about how we can make our special state even better. These are not easy times. That's an understatement. A persistent global pandemic continues to threaten the health of our people and the well-being of our economy. And that's why I'm so proud to have been the author of the Paycheck Protection Program that has helped 3 out of 4 Maine small businesses. That's 28,000 Maine small businesses. It's brought $2.3 billion to this state in forgivable loans, and it has helped to sustain 250,000 Maine jobs. I want you, the people of Maine, to know that I've always put you first. You, and you alone, are my priority. And I have been honored to serve you each and every day. That's why I've never missed a single roll call vote. That's more than 7,400 votes. 7,486, but who's counting? I also want to thank the thousands of great volunteers that we have had all over the state. Town and county chairs everywhere in the state of Maine. We've had sportsmen and women join our coalition, law enforcement officers, small business owners, shipbuilders, firefighters, police officers, sheriffs. It goes on and on. And you might also recognize some of the friends and volunteers who have appeared in our television ads. Thank you, each and every one of you, for stepping up and standing with me when I needed you. I'll never forget your support and your willingness to stand with me. Finally, I want to introduce to all of you someone that I'm sure you've never heard of, but he's been one of my greatest volunteers, whom I've named the MVP of our campaign. He's gone above and beyond to help me because he cares as much about our state as I do. In fact, his name is synonymous with the state of Maine. In this crowd, some of you may know him as Julie Green's younger brother. But across Maine, we know him as Bill Green. So, Bill, come on up here. And, Bill, we have a very special Yeti Green MVP.
And you've been watching Senator Susan Collins addressing her supporters in Bangor right now. Again, way too early for this race to be called. It could be a long night, could be a long week if it goes to ranked choice voting. This has been a CBS 13 Fox 23 live update. We'll continue to have more with that in a moment. Meantime, as we continue our coverage here live on WGME.com, we're joined now by Scott Thuman. Of course, a lot of the nation, Scott, has voted already, and a lot of the polls are starting to close in the eastern part of the country, or will be soon. The last state, by the way, that's going to close will be Alaska, 1 a.m. Eastern time. Doesn't necessarily mean this race is going to be decided by then, though. Let's go ahead and go to Sinclair's chief political correspondent, Scott Thuman. Scott, where should we expect possible delays when it comes to determining the presidency?
It'll be interesting to see what happens with that Senate race in your neck of the woods. But if you look further south, of course, Georgia could take a while. They've got 6 million potential votes, which would be a record by possibly 2 million. So really kind of blowing those numbers out of the water. As a result, that means it might take longer to count. They hope to have everything in a couple days. They don't know, but that's a big swing state. It's one that President Trump won by 5 points last time around. Republican margins have been shrinking there, so it could be a nail biter. Look at a place like Pennsylvania. They have up to 3 more days to count mail-in ballots if necessary. That's a state that was won by less than 1% last time around. Michigan, Wisconsin, these are states that don't open most of those mail-in ballots until today. Even if they've gotten them, they have these rules where they can't start counting them until Election Day, except for a few of the precincts. So now that has to get underway. All of these things combined allow for the possibility that we may have to have more patience. We'll keep a very close eye on it. We'll bring you updates as we get them, Greg.
Live for us at the White House tonight. Scott will be checking in with you throughout the evening. Thanks, Scott.
Patience is the key for this evening. And we do want to go to the 2nd District. Democratic Congressman Jared Golden is looking for his first re-election bid.
He's held a strong lead, at least as far as the polls are concerned, over his Republican challenger Dale Crafts. Let's go ahead and check in with CBS 13's Blair Best live in Lewiston for us. Blair, what's it going to take for him to win this race at this point? What do you see?
Well, we're outside Democratic incumbent Jared Golden's campaign headquarters here in Lewiston. Now, originally, they had planned to hold a viewing party at a local brewery, but due to the rising COVID-19 cases, they decided to cancel those plans at the last minute. Now, Golden was first elected to Congress in 2018 when he flipped the seat to Democratic control by defeating Republican incumbent Bruce Poliquin. It was the first congressional election in our country's history that used ranked choice voting to decide the winner. This year, ranked choice voting won't play a role in this race since there are no third-party candidates. Now, it's important to note that the race for Maine's 2nd District will affect the partisan control of the U.S. House of Representatives. And according to a recent study, Democrats currently have a majority lead in the House seats that are up for election. Now, we are expecting to hear from Golden at some point tonight, but meanwhile, we'll wait for some results to come in and continue to check in with his campaign manager. For now, we're live in Lewiston. I'll toss it back inside to you.
All right, Blair, thanks so much. A lot to watch in the 2nd District.
Absolutely. And speaking of the 2nd District, also in Lewiston, the Republican challenger, Dale Crafts, he's been meeting with supporters there. Our David Singer is joining us there live as well.
Yeah, and David, we do want to know, how's the Crafts campaign feeling about this evening?
Been able to catch up with Mr. Crafts yet. He just entered the building and meeting some of his supporters right now. It's still kind of quiet here. This is also serving tonight as the Trump HQ, the Maine GOP HQ, as they host their watch party here as well. Take a look over here. Dale Crafts again. It's been kind of a quiet evening so far as he just arrived. Now, he is entering Election Day behind in several polls, with several polls showing him at least 6 points behind incumbent Democrat Jared Golden, who currently has the seat for the 2nd District. Now, President Trump endorsed Crafts at the beginning of August, and he has been tweeting his support ever since, notably a few weeks ago. And Crafts, notably for his part, backs Trump on repealing the Affordable Care Act and wants a competitive type of insurance market for Americans. Now, as we make our way over here to meet with him, we'll let you know how the Crafts campaign is feeling tonight as he's meeting with his supporters. Greg, Jen.
All right, David, tracking the 2nd District tonight for sure. Hey, let's take a look at the updated electoral map right now. This is based on projections by the Associated Press. No surprises yet, as you can probably tell from this map. Red means Trump, blue means Biden. President Trump has Kentucky, South Carolina, West Virginia so far, projected winners. Joe Biden, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Jersey, Delaware, of course, his home state, and Illinois. These are the states that we've seen so far, the projected winners from the AP. Not a surprise. That's the important message so far. Nothing surprising yet. Take it in New Hampshire. Polls closed there about an hour and a half, well, an hour 40 minutes ago at this point. This is at this point too close to call officially, but as you can see, early numbers so far. And of course, so much depends on which votes they're counting first, as far as whether or not this is telling as far as the night's going to go. But at this point, a sizable lead for Joe Biden in the Granite State, 59% to 39% over Donald Trump.
Also in the Granite State, in the race for Senate there, the incumbent Jean Shaheen, she is seeking a 3rd term in Washington. The AP has called this one for Shaheen over the challenger Corky Messner and the Libertarian Justin O'Donnell.
And to the race for governor in the Granite State, Republican Governor Chris Sununu seeking a 2nd term, and he is a projected winner as well over Democrat Dan Feltus and Libertarian Darrell Perry. Again, at this point, Chris Sununu is your projected winner, winning re-election there for governor of New Hampshire. Let's go ahead and send it on over to the live desk as well as we continue to track some of the state questions and a lot of the issues out there. John, if you're ready for us, let's go to you at the live desk.
We're good now. You got to have batteries in the microphone in order for it to work. We are keeping an eye on a lot of the results as they're coming in, and we're hoping to have some Portland results here to bring to you, but those are not in yet. They are still tallying them, and as we know, there's no statewide referendum questions on the ballot this year, but certainly here in Portland, in the city, we're making up for that. There are 6 questions here in the city, and again, the city is still tallying those results as the ballots are coming in, so we don't know yet where Portland voters kind of decided on those questions that are on the ballot, but what we can tell you is kind of what we're looking at on those various questions and how they could play out. So question A involves raising the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour over the next 3 years. That plan would also require employers to pay time and a half during states of emergency like pandemic, so like what we're in right now. Question B is on banning the use of facial surveillance technology by public officials. That already passed by a city ordinance, but some of the protections and enforcements that one of the groups that put this on the ballot want, that is not in. So that would change if this passes. And question C would enact a so-called Green New Deal, which includes tracking the city's use of fossil fuels. It also would require apartment units to be affordable in new developments. It also makes some changes to the building code and put some new restrictions on developers here in the city. Question D, also on the Portland ballot, is rent control. And if it passes, landlords could only increase rent by a small amount each year. And then question E seeks to restrict some of the short-term rentals in Portland like Airbnb. And finally, question F would remove the cap on marijuana stores and dispensaries and allow them to be within 100 feet of each other. So obviously a lot going on here in Portland. Let me just refresh to make sure that those results have not come in yet. No, we are keeping an eye on those results as they're coming in from the city of Portland. But of course, just as soon as we have those results, which are so important to so many voters here in the city, we will be sure to come back to you guys and make sure that we mention that. But again, no statewide referendum questions this year on the ballot, just those questions here in the city. But like we said, enough of them to really make up for the lack of a statewide referendum this year.
Yeah, there's so many unusual things about 2020. As you mentioned it, John, I just realized there is no statewide referendum, which is really unusual, but we got a lot else going on, so there's plenty to talk about, that's for sure.
Yeah, and like I said, we'll make sure just to get those results as soon as we get them here from the city of Portland, but it could be a little bit. So again, nothing yet on those races, but a lot of people are talking about those referendum questions and some of the big changes, the wholesale changes to the city ordinance if those questions do pass here.
Some big ticket items on that ballot in Portland. John, thank you so much, and we'll come back to you throughout the course of the evening. We do want to go back to our political expert, Andy Rudolevich, who is joining us here in the studio. Again, social distancing style here with Andy. And Andy, you were looking at some of the numbers and some of the states that the president really needed to win tonight. And Florida is obviously one of them. You were telling us that you're seeing some news about Florida.
Yeah, it's actually maybe not surprising, but certainly good news for the president in Florida, at least so far, with a lot of the vote counted because of there was so much early voting, and Florida is one of those states where they're allowed to start processing those ballots in advance of Election Day. The president has just a couple percentage point lead, but it would appear that Joe Biden's hopes for a huge burst in Miami-Dade County, right, in South Florida, is falling a little short of what he had hoped for. Latino votes, in particular, are not breaking as heavily for Biden as he had hoped. He seems to be doing well in the rest of the state, but again, falling short, especially in the Cuban-American community in South Florida. So, you know, at the moment, even though the race is still tight and hardly formally decided, it looks like the must-win state of Florida may be a win for President Trump. Georgia, at the moment, is looking pretty good for Trump as well. Again, a state he won comfortably in 2016. On the other hand, Ohio is looking somewhat good, at least in the early stages for Biden. Even Texas, where Biden is strongly outrunning Hillary Clinton's 2016 performance. So that's going to be a long night. All this is to say, we maybe shouldn't be surprised by much of this because it just suggests we're going to be in for the long haul as we count all the votes well after tonight is over.
Yes, it might be quite a while, so patience is the key. Andy, thanks so much. We're going to check back with you a little bit later.
And as we continue our live coverage here at WGME.com and on Facebook, I want to tell our viewers, by the way, coming up at 8:54, we're going to have another live update on CBS 13, so you'll hear us mention that. And at that point, you'll be watching us online. You'll be watching us on air if you wish as well at the same time. So just to give you a heads up, at 8:54, we'll be joining CBS coverage as well. Michael Shepard, our good friend and the political editor, politics editor from the Bangor Daily News, joining us right now. Michael, great to see you tonight, joining us via Zoom. Of course, everything this year, Michael, as we know, a little different when it comes to how we do these election nights. I know normally we might have you in our studios, but can't do it tonight, I guess. But hey, it is what it is. And
that's right.
Michael, you've been following these congressional races really, really closely throughout the election season. What's standing out to you right now when it comes to these races for Congress and even the Senate race, if you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, right now we have, I think it's about maybe half a percentage point of all the votes that we're going to have tonight. So it's going to be, we really haven't learned too much about these races so far. But look, I mean, these have been really steady races the whole year, just like the presidential race. You know, we've had Susan Collins and Sarah Gideon really close most of the year. Sarah Gideon maybe a little bit ahead. We're getting more rural towns from the 2nd District in right now. So again, you're not really seeing too much. We're not really learning too much right now about these races. So I think in a half hour we'll have a little more clarity maybe on some bigger towns as we go along here. But yeah, I mean, this has been a really steady year in the Senate race, and the two members of Congress, Jared Golden and Shelley Pingree, look to be ahead in their races as well. But we'll see how this goes as we get more votes in tonight.
And we love, obviously, our website, WGME.com. But if you want to open another tab there at home, the BDN does a great job of running a lot of the numbers and stuff like that, updating that constantly, and really drills down into those really local races, too. So go ahead, open another tab and take a look at the BDN's website if you're not already doing that. Michael, again, we've been talking about how we thought the 1st and 2nd district races, and perhaps I was a little surprised the 2nd district race, at least as far as the polling, looked like it was strongly going for the incumbent, in this case, Jared Golden. We've seen that race, that district, I should say, flip-flop. In fact, I think I looked at the numbers. Over the last 60 years, a Republican has held that seat for exactly 30 of those years, and a Democrat has held that seat for exactly 30 of those years, just to give you a sense of just how much that is a swing district up in the 2nd district.
Yeah, that's right. And this year was a strange one in a lot of ways. But in that race in particular, the Republican primary was delayed by a month. So you had some lesser known challengers, the people who wanted to challenge Jared Golden just had a little less time to get their name out there. And I think that played a role in Dale Craft's race. He didn't raise too much money. He had a harder time getting momentum. And, the polls didn't look good. So at the end of the race, his allies kind of cut bait on him, it looked like. And this was a race that's always going to be kind of dependent on how the president does up there. It looks like he's not doing quite so well up there as he did in 2016. Of course, we'll see how as the night goes on if that rings true. But
yeah,
that was sort of the issue for Dale Crafts in that race, and why Jared Golden might be pretty relatively safe here.
All right, stay tuned. Michael Shepard from the BDN joining us here live. We're coming up about a minute and a half away from our live update on CBS 13, but I want to turn it over to Jen because she has a question for our political expert as well. Jen, over to you.
And we want to go quickly back to our political expert who's in-house, Andy Rudalevich. And Andy, we were talking just a few minutes ago about some of the really key important states for the president to win tonight. Maybe you could give us a quick rundown for our viewers who are joining us about some of those key states that are in play tonight.
Sure. Well, you'll remember perhaps in 2016, President Trump threaded a needle toppling over the blue wall that the Clinton campaign thought it had erected up in the upper Midwest. So President Trump won Florida, which President Obama had won back in 2008. He won North Carolina. He was able then, of course, to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And so, again, the Trump campaign strategy is really to replicate that victory, right? And they could lose one of those states maybe up in the upper Midwest, but they need to basically hold to what they were able to win 4 years ago, where the Biden campaign, if they had been able to win Florida, and it increasingly looks like they won't, they would have had quite a number of possible paths in terms of flipping states. I think they're pretty confident about Michigan. They're pretty confident about Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, kind of on a tipping point. That's one we may be paying a lot of attention to as we move forward.
We will be all throughout the night. Andy, I don't want to cut you short, but we do have to do a quick cut-in on CBS 13, and we'll be right back.
And good evening for a CBS 13 special update. I am Greg Lagerquist.
I'm Jen Long. We're giving you an update with all the election results as they come in here in Maine and across the country. Let's first take a look at where the presidential race is right now. So far, Joe Biden is in the lead with 85 electoral votes, winning states including Massachusetts, Maryland, Delaware, and a few other ones that you see there on the map.
Meanwhile, President Trump, the red states, there's 61 electoral votes so far, projected winners getting wins in Alabama, Arkansas, and Kentucky as well. And no surprises really in Oklahoma added as well at this point. So no surprises on the electoral map so far. We'll continue to track that. We're also keeping a close eye on our local races right here in Maine, including each of the House districts. CBS 13's Blair Best is tracking the Jared Golden campaign for us tonight.
Now, just moments ago, we were led inside Democratic incumbent Jared Golden's campaign headquarters here in Lewiston. Now, Golden was first elected to Congress in 2018 when he flipped the seat to Democratic control after defeating Republican incumbent Bruce Poliquin. Now, we are expecting to hear from Golden at some point tonight, and we'll have the latest updates from his campaign throughout the evening.
Blair, thank you. And CBS 13's David Singer is also joining us live from Lewiston with the Republican candidate Dale Crafts and his campaign. David.
Yes, we're here live in Lewiston, which is also serving as the Crafts campaign headquarters and the Trump campaign headquarters. We just caught up with candidate Dale Crafts. He says he's feeling good, even though it's early in the evening. I asked him about the spread of polling numbers, showing him at times between 6 and 10 points behind. He says he doesn't care about those. His own internal pollsters are showing him in a good position. Also asked him about the financing discrepancies in this race, his lack of fundraising, fewer dollars raised in his campaign as compared to other races for the 2nd Congressional District. He says it doesn't matter about money. It comes down to the candidate. Trump has endorsed Crafts and has been tweeting his support all this month. Jen, Greg.
David, thank you. And there are also races across the border in New Hampshire that we're keeping up with tonight.
Yeah, polls closed in New Hampshire about 7 o'clock tonight. So a couple of hours ago, we actually do have some projected winners over in the Granite State. Let's go ahead and take First, a look at the Senate race there. Jeanne Shaheen seeking re-election, her third term, I believe. At this point, she is the projected winner right now over her Republican challenger, Corky Messner, and the Libertarian candidate in the race. Again, results still coming in, but Jeanne Shaheen, the projected winner. Also, 4 electoral votes, just like Maine, up for grabs there. And, oh, I'm sorry, we should take a quick look at the gubernatorial race. Chris Sununu seeking re-election. Chris Sununu also the projected winner in New Hampshire. He, at this point, has 61% of the counted votes so far, those that have come in on the electoral votes. On the so far counted votes, 61% so far for Chris Sununu, the projected winner in the race for governor.
And it is safe to say it's been an election like we've never seen before. A lot of people voting absentee today, and a lot of votes are already coming in before Election Day.
Yeah, obviously this is a large part because of the pandemic, played a big role in what we're seeing today at the polls, how quickly we could get the results tonight and how long that may stretch out. Lauren Healy has been joining us live from Augusta tonight, where ballots are being counted as we speak now. Lauren, quick update from you.
In the process of being counted. We're still waiting on that right at this moment. Election officials have just started to go through the process of counting those ballots here. We're live right inside of the Augusta City Center. I'm going to step out of the way and give you a look at what's going on here. And this is the location where the counting of the ballots will take place. Now, this is also
Thank you so much to Lauren, and all of our field crews have been working all throughout the night tonight, and you know, it's been an interesting evening thus far. So I'm going to ask my producer now where you want us to go as we continue our live show here on Fox 23 and CBS 13. And we do want to go to our Brad Rogers, who is joining us in the 2nd District in Bangor. He is with the Susan Collins campaign. And Brad, I know that you've been outside. Of course, it's kind of different this year as we're in a pandemic, right? And hopefully everyone was bundled up for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of nice, though, as you saw, and of course, and as a lot of our viewers saw, Senator Collins did come out with her entourage a short time ago and sort of used that time to thank her family, all her supporters, her campaign manager and such. But then she also used some of the time as well to take a few more jabs at her opponents. Sarah, get in this, talking about all the money that was spent on the race and all the negative ads that she ran against Senator Collins, and talking about really saying that you know, Maine is not a Senate seat that someone can buy. Of course, Senator Collins, as we all know, she also spent a good amount of money on negative ads towards Sarah Gideon as well. So it was really a two-way street here. She also talked about the Paycheck Protection Program and how successful that has been, helping 3 out of 4 Maine businesses through this pandemic, as well as 250,000 Mainers, having them that Paycheck Protection Program, helping them keep their jobs and keeping the pay coming for those people and those families. So that's kind of where we stand right now. Polls just now closing here in Maine. Of course, there's probably still people in line, and they're going to let anyone in line, of course, can still vote if you're still in line. And it'll just, I tell you, I'm just on pins and needles wondering how this race is going to turn out. The sad thing is, if it does go to a ranked choice vote, I talked to the Secretary of State earlier, and we may be talking about a week, even 2 weeks, maybe even longer before we know the outcome, if it goes to a ranked choice vote or even something like that. So we are live in Bangor tonight. Brad Rogers, CBS 13 News. Back to you guys.
Yeah, the only real window, Brad, we have on that is we saw in the spring with the, or earlier we should say this year because it was delayed with the Republican primary. We saw it take a week and 2 days for ranked choice voting to determine the Republican primary for the 2nd District congressional race. So again, that's a barometer for how long this could take if it does go to ranked choice voting. So we'll keep watching that. Hey, one quick note, if there's still people in line at 9 o'clock who've been waiting to vote, kudos to them for waiting that long. I suspect all the votes are in at this point across Maine, but again, it took a while. It could take a while.
That's right.
Could take. You're probably flashing back to 8 o'clock.
Yes, correct.
I suspect.
And the cold may be getting.
I know, it's a long night, trust me.
Yeah, the cold may be getting to Brad. But Brad, thank you so much for that live report. We do want to send it over to John Chrysos, who is at the live desk. John.
Brad, I feel, the time thing really is hard to keep track of at this point between coming in early and being here and expecting a long night ahead. But we do know that there are some other results. We, of course, have been watching the U.S. Senate race very closely. We know that Kentucky Senator Mitch McConnell, he has won his re-election. Of course, that has been a key race as well that people have been following. Mitch McConnell, of course, the Senate Majority Leader in the Senate. And he wants, of course, his other Republican Senator Collins to go back and win as well. But a very tough race here. Collins' challenger, Sarah Gideon, she wants that seat as well. She's in Portland tonight. Marissa Bodner is live with the Gideon campaign. And Marissa, the polls have been closed at this point now for about an hour, if we're keeping track of the time correctly, 9 o'clock now in the 9 o'clock hour. But what is the plan there? We saw Senator Collins earlier. Have you seen Speaker Gideon at this point?
No, John, as you mentioned, we did hear Senator Susan Collins address supporters in Bangor. We have not heard from Speaker Sarah Gideon yet. Her staff tells me she is here. She's watching returns with her family as they start to trickle in. Really not much to report there just yet. Earlier today, Gideon was out campaigning. She was talking to voters at the polls. And she had actually just wrapped up yesterday a 4-day tour of Maine's 16 counties. So really out there campaigning to the very end. And this race is being watched very closely across the state, across the nation. This is one of several seats Democrats are hoping to flip to try to take control of the Senate. As Brad mentioned, a lot of money has poured into Maine for this race. It's been the most expensive Senate race in Maine history. Gideon really proving to be the toughest challenger yet to Senator Susan Collins in her 24-year career. She is seeking a 5th term. Back in 2014, her last re-election, she won with 68% of the vote. If polls are any indication, that's very unlikely to be the case this year. The polls show Collins and Gideon really in a dead heat. And we have to mention there are 2 other candidates, 2 third-party candidates in this race, Max Lynn and Lisa Savage. And Savage has encouraged her supporters to choose Gideon as their second choice. So we'll have to wait and see how all of this plays out. There's certainly a lot to watch. And as we discussed earlier, if this does go to ranked choice voting, we could be waiting quite a while, John.
You maintain it because it's absolutely critical by far. This is your #1 vote center in the state of Ohio. Again, I keep watching the suburbs here up to 61.
And we do want to bring in our political analyst for the night, Andy Rudalevich. He is the Thomas Brackett Reed Professor of Government at Bowdoin College. Thank you so much for being here, Andy.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we were just talking off camera about how kind of wild this year has been. We've
so many respects
lived through a pandemic. The economy before that was doing really well, then crashed. And all the while, we're also trying to elect a new president. And what are we seeing in terms of the polling numbers?
Well, it's amazing. If you look at the national polling numbers from, say, last November, even before that, they are almost exactly the same as they were over the last weekend before Election Day, right? Joe Biden has had a lead, not an immense lead, but a statistical lead, of almost the exact same amount, from last year. Now, remember everything that's happened. You mentioned a few things, but let's add impeachment of the president, right? Back in the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, and of course his acquittal in the Senate, one of the issues that's motivated the Maine Senate race. We've had, as you mentioned, the onset of the COVID crisis. We've had the collapse of the economy, the partial recovery of the economy, but now the pandemic rages on. It's increasing in a lot of states. We've had huge discussions and protests over racial justice in this country. All of this has done almost nothing to change those poll numbers. And so, we are in a weird way looking at a rerun of 2016. People have made up their mind about the president. And the real question is where that vote is distributed. Is it in the right states for him to win the Electoral College?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fascinating too. And we saw little movements in the needle. For example, we saw Joe Biden tick up a bit, Donald Trump tick down a bit after the first debate, which by all accounts was sort of chaos. And then we saw when President Trump thankfully recovered. But when he was diagnosed with COVID-19 and some of the other things, he ticked down a little bit in the polls, but he's sort of come back up from that nadir. And I don't know about you, Andy, was this what you would expect with such major events, but the poll numbers overall really aren't moving?
Well, I have to say, in terms of studying the presidency and presidential elections from a quantitative viewpoint, this has screwed up the models for years to come, right? President Trump's approval rating has been a flat line since 2017, and as you say, you know, a little bit of bouncing around here and there, but he's never been above 50%, and the Gallup approval rating never really been below the mid-30s. And, you know, when there's been a dip, there has usually been a recovery as people come back to him. You know, normally we try to predict electoral results using things like economic growth. But of course, the second quarter of 2020 was, you know, a statistical nightmare. The third quarter bounced back partially, but neither of those is a number that fits very well into our normal expectations of economic performance. And so, you know, this election is going to have to sort of be tossed out of these statistical models looking forward. You know, I think the Trump phenomenon is one that is going to really drive political science for a long time.
You could have whole new classes to teach at Bowdoin College here, Andy.
Indeed so. Well, next fall maybe when we get our students back on campus. That would be great.
Yeah.
It's been a weird year. Andy, don't go anywhere. Obviously you can't. You're in our studio and we've got to hold on
I'm
to you
trapped, never fear.
for the next couple of hours. Thanks so much, Andy. Again, we appreciate everyone. Appreciate you, Andy, and appreciate everyone watching us at WGME.com. As we've been talking about tonight, a record number of voters this election year, not just here in Maine, but around the country. So many of them casting their ballots early or absentee, and a lot of these folks are casting their ballots for the first time in Maine. CBS 13's Blair Best spoke with some of those first-time voters.
It felt really exciting to know that I have a voice, and because I didn't have a voice before.
And finally, like, what I've been putting out in the world is gonna go into what's happening in the country.
I feel like this is a big election. It's time that we all come out to vote.
I felt like I was in a lot of pressure.
Warsami Ali is 19 years old and voted for the first time today.
I haven't done this before, and if I don't choose the right president or the right senator to vote for, you know, to help us out, it might feel like I've done something wrong in our community.
It was also the first time for Madeline Gajewski, who brought her mother to the booth.
I thought it was going to be really intimidating and scary. That's why I made my mom come with me, but it was honestly pretty chill.
Lydia Stein turned 18 2 weeks ago and has been waiting a long time to cast her own ballot.
I mean, I've always been like a young activist in my community, and it's time to like actually make change, and now I'm at the age where I can do it and some of my friends can vote, and we're going to be the next generation of people that can change this country.
You know, the world is run by the people that actually show up.
The Secretary of State says they're seeing a historic number of voters this year, and many of them are doing it for the first time.
And this particular election cycle has engendered an awful lot of intense interest from every corner of the demographic, but especially young people.
He says we're also seeing more young people volunteer at the polls and even run for office.
I feel like we should vote because everyone's asking for a change. Everyone's asking for a change in our world.
Our voice does really matter. It really does.
Let's go ahead and bring in John Chrysos at the live desk for us once again, John. And again, it's been a fascinating night, and we're seeing the impact of young voters here. And obviously, I think when it comes to people turning out, no matter what your party is, seeing people participate is a key issue, whether you're young, old, or in between.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an exciting time. We all remember the first time that we voted and waiting to turn old enough to be able to register to vote and then go in and vote in that election. And some new data that we're still going over. It's an AP survey, really a snapshot of Maine voters. And speaking of the age issue, this AP snapshot found that in the race for Senate, voters under 45 were more likely to back Sarah Gideon. So it sounds like she is getting a boost from those young voters who we just heard from. And when it comes to older voters, the two candidates are about tied.
It's so funny because I've heard personally from a lot of people who've never voted before, forget the young folks, but people who've never voted before, and this year they decided this is the year I'm going to vote. I don't know if either of you have heard that from people, but I've heard it from quite a few people.
I think it's a factor.
First time for everything, right?
Yeah.
I've got an 18-year-old who voted for the first time as well. And I have a
It's
20-year-old
exciting.
who voted, I guess, in his first presidential election as well. So I've got 2 young voters in the household at this point. Let's go ahead and turn back to the race for the White House right now. The Trump campaign says they are confident that people voting today, young, old, in between, are going to get them to the finish line for a second term. Sinclair National correspondent James Rosen is at the White House tonight. He has a look at how President Trump is spending his final hours of the campaign and at this point hunkered down at the White House there, James.
Greg, good evening from the White House, where we believe President Trump is inside the executive mansion watching the election returns unfold. Earlier today, he made what you might consider his final campaign stop of this election cycle. Just a short trip across the river to Northern Virginia, specifically to Arlington, and to his own campaign headquarters. There, in about 7 minutes of remarks, he thanked his supporters and volunteers, spoke of what an honor it has been to serve as president, directed a few barbs, as you might imagine, to the news media, and in response to one reporter's question, defended his handling one final time of the coronavirus, in essence arguing that the only piece of it that he might have gotten wrong would be the public relations angle. I've been speaking with senior Trump campaign aides over the last several hours. They are projecting what they call calm confidence that things are breaking the president's way. They were depending on a huge election day turnout of Trump supporters in order to overcome the huge lead in early balloting that former Vice President Joe Biden had amassed in the period up to Election Day. By 5:30 p.m., they had seen a lead that the former Vice President had amassed in Florida evaporate, and the president now, of course, has won Florida. The Trump campaign aides say they're seeing similar things in Northeast Pennsylvania, particularly Luzerne County and other Trump-friendly counties. They're seeing huge turnout that they think is going to make the difference. North Carolina, same. Georgia, they think they've laid the foundation there. But all of this is going to make Pennsylvania critical. Even Minnesota, the Trump campaign says they think they're doing decently well there. So calm confidence from the Trump campaign, but a lot left still to learn about how this election is going to unfold.
Yeah, things certainly unfolding tonight, James, and coming in quickly at this point. You mentioned Florida. Obviously, it sounds like that is tilting for the president. How about the president's plans for tonight? We know that this week there were a couple of changes at exactly where he's going to be tonight, where he's going to be watching. And what are you hearing there at the White House?
Will was supposed to be held at the Trump Hotel, the elegant institution just a few blocks from here, but that was scrapped within the last 48 hours. And as we say, we believe the president is inside the White House watching the election returns unfold. There was a large group of supporters who were admitted to the East Room for a celebration there. Even the reporters, including this one, were all given swabs with which to perform COVID tests as a price of admission to that gathering. First Lady Melania Trump, we should point out, was seen approaching the polling station in Palm Beach, Florida earlier this morning. She offered onlookers there a brief wave as she made her way into that polling site. Presumably, Greg, we can safely say we know for whom the First Lady voted.
I would imagine as well, James. James Rosen at the White House, again, waiting to hear the president speak. So we appreciate you breaking away from your coverage there at the White House to talk to us tonight. Thanks so much, James. Go ahead and bring in John and Jen, of course, right now as well as we continue to take a look at things. Safe to say this is really an election like never seen before.
Absolutely. As we've been talking, a lot of people, including myself, have voted absentee this year. So the actual day has felt very different for a lot of people. More than 500,000 Mainers voted absentee. We do want to check in with our Lauren Healy, who is joining us live in Augusta as the ballots are literally being counted behind you. Lauren, what can you tell us about what's happening there?
Yeah, absolutely, Jen. Like you mentioned, so many people voting absentee. The polls were definitely a little bit lighter this year, but did still see that steady flow of people. We were here about an hour before the polls started to close, and we were seeing that line full of people starting to filter in, and people were here right up until that last second casting their ballots. But like you mentioned, Jen, right behind me, they are starting to count the ballots right now. These election workers have been working very diligently and very hard all night. And as you can see, they're taking them out of the machines here right now. And we are inside the Augusta City Center, and this is the location of one of the polling locations, actually, one of 4 polling locations. And like we mentioned, the counting is taking place right now. There were 2 machines. One was for the municipal races, and the other machines were for the state and federal races. Now, no results, right now at this moment, but we will make sure to bring you updates throughout the night. But like I mentioned, all of this happening right now, and as soon as we have any results, we'll be sure to pass them along to you. We're live in Augusta. Lauren Healy, I'll send it back to you.
Thanks so much. Fascinating to see the voting actually literally happening behind you there right now.
It is like kind of how the sausage is made.
Yeah,
There's all these big piles of ballots and feeding them into the machine. So that is kind of cool. So Lauren, we'll check back in with you a little later tonight. I think it's going to be a long night for those ladies. We do want to bring in our political analyst, Andy Rudalevich. Thank you so much, Andy, for being with us tonight.
A pleasure.
And it's 9:16 at this point. We've kind of hit a lull, as you might say, in the evening, where we've gotten some early results coming in, but those were to be expected. Now we're kind of settling in and waiting a little bit.
And we're all sort of staring at Florida right now, and it looks like maybe we shouldn't stare much longer, because I know it sounds like, and James Rosen said, actually quoting, we should be clear here, quoting the Trump campaign, saying that they've won Florida.
Yeah, they feel confident, obviously. And again, the results that have been counted certainly lean that way. There's, not a lot separating the two percentage-wise, but in a state as big as Florida, that is a couple 100,000 votes, and clearly the Trump campaign at least feels that the Biden campaign won't be able to make up those votes in the parts of the state that have not reported yet.
Yeah, hopefully no dangling chads in 2020 here as well.
The good news, I guess, about the 2000 election is that Florida really did clean up its election administration after that. Right,
they got rid of those punch cards.
We're hoping that Pennsylvania 2020 is not Florida 2000, right? That's where we could be moving. And James Rosen, talked about all eyes on Pennsylvania as the place where, both candidates could converge on 270 electoral votes, assuming again that states go as they did last time around. But, if you're the Biden campaign, I guess at the moment you're hopeful about Ohio. You're looking maybe up a little bit at Texas. It's unclear right now, but he's leading at the moment there.
Biden is leading in Texas right now.
Yeah, by a little
significant.
bit. Yeah,
potentially, yeah.
Texas is certainly going purple. It may not go blue quite yet, but again, huge turnout there. We've seen huge turnout around the country. This could be the biggest turnout in percentage terms. It'll certainly be the biggest turnout in absolute terms of voters, 150 million plus voters probably across the U.S., but it could be the highest turnout in percentage terms since the early part of the 20th century. Right? So we could be talking, anywhere from 67 to 75% turnout, which would be astonishing if you, think of our average as having been sort of in the mid-50s most of the time.
And some of those states that you were talking about, Texas, Ohio, that really speaks to kind of the changing mood across the country.
Yeah, I mean, obviously some of it is demographic change, maybe in Texas more than Ohio. Some of it is, the factor of the campaign, the fact that, to the degree that you feel that the COVID crisis is the crucial aspect of the campaign, and we've seen some competing exit poll numbers on that front. You're probably breaking towards Biden at the moment, and the upper Midwest has been pretty hard hit by this latest wave of the virus. If your concern is the economy and the prospects for economic comeback, those exit polls suggest that those voters tend to be favoring President Trump. So it's really this battle over how you interpret the current situation. Is the virus sort of past us and we can begin to focus again on the economy, or do we need to center again on the public health issues? That really may be, where this election comes down to, whether it's in the upper Midwest, in Ohio, or even in Arizona, which we should expect some results from in an hour or so.
Yeah, it should be soon. And we should also mention there's a little bit of breaking news. A judge out in Nevada has extended the polling deadline by an hour out there because they're trying to make sure that everyone has a chance to vote because of some problems that they were having apparently earlier in the day. Potentially significant. Nevada is potentially one of those swing states too. And you mentioned, though, you can sort of venture perhaps a little further than we can here, Andy. Florida, we should be clear, Florida is still too close to call officially. But again, you think that Ohio could be in play?
Again,
or maybe it's looking stronger for Biden at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio was not all that close in 2016, right? It was a pretty solid red state, and Ohio's been a bellwether state in presidential elections for a long time now. So I mean, at least the way, the places that votes are coming in, it appears, in Ohio are ahead of where, far ahead of where the Clinton campaign was in 2016. Maybe that's all we can say right now. And so if those margins hold up, again, they could be offset by increased Trump votes from elsewhere in the state. But if they held up, it is a place where the vice president might be able to switch the state in a way that could be important.
All right. We'll keep watching it, that's for sure. We know you will too, Andy. Hey, let's go ahead and turn over to Michael Shepard now from our good friends at the BDN. And Jen, I know you've been talking with Michael as well.
Yeah, and Michael Shepard, we have been talking about how at this point we don't have a lot of polling numbers in yet, so it's hard to kind of talk about what might happen later on. But speaking about the campaign and everything that's happened here in Maine for the past few months and what you've been seeing, maybe you can touch on that for us.
Yeah, I mean, again, we don't have too much in right now. It looks like we've got about 9% of towns and maybe 4% of votes. So it's really hard to tell what's going on out there right now. We're seeing some trends. Fort Kent, for example, is one of the bigger towns we've seen come in so far, and Trump has won it. It looks like by 3 percentage points. He won it by about half a point in 2016. So we're seeing some early on as we get some of these small towns in across the 2nd district, and that's why you see Trump actually leading the state right now. We have this trend of Trump towns from 2016 getting slightly Trumpier, for lack of a better term. But we really don't have towns in southern Maine in right now, so it's hard to talk too much about what this means. We really want to see some more data, but it's just something that we're emerging. It's emerging here in the early going.
Yeah, we almost take it as a given, Michael. The southern district, the 1st congressional district, which is southern Maine, wraps up the mid-coast, is going to be strongly Biden. And it's in the 2nd district where the keys are going to be. So Jen was just asking as well, where are some of the places you're seeing some strong Trump support so far?
Yeah, I mean, places like I just mentioned, Fort Kent. We've seen some small towns that were big Trump towns in 2016 come in. So this is, if you're looking at results online right now, this is why the results look like that. There are also some emerging signs in southern Maine that Biden could do a little better than Clinton did in some places. So, it's too early to talk too much about what these results mean. And we're just we're reading tea leaves at this point. And, I don't mean to overstate anything for sure.
Yeah, reading tea leaves. I mean, it's only 9:30
right?
And it's going to be a very long night and if not a long week. So Michael Shepard, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to check back in with you throughout the evening as well.
Don't go far
Thank
here,
you.
Michael. And just so everyone knows, coming up at 9:24, so 30 seconds from right now, we'll be live on CBS 13. So the next words you hear out of Jen and I talking, Michael, unfortunately, I don't think you're going to be part of us on CBS 13. We appreciate you being on our online show. So the next words you hear from Jen and I will be live on CBS 13.
Good evening and welcome to our CBS 13 studio. I'm Jen Long.
And I'm Greg Lager, because we're keeping a very close eye on the local races happening right now all across Maine. Of course, polls have been closed for an hour and a half at this point. Let's take a look at one of the biggest races, though, we're watching in our state. Really one of the biggest races around the country when it comes to control of the U.S. Senate. That's the Senate race between Susan Collins, Sarah Gideon, and the 2 independent candidates. Again, hard to say exactly where these early precincts are reporting from, which makes all the difference, or whether or not we're counting absentee ballots early, which we had heard Maine obviously was processing those. But at this point, taking it with a grain of salt, Susan Collins with a sizable lead in early precincts, early ballots counted. She has 59% seeking her 5th term. Sarah Gideon, the Democrat, at 34%. The 2 independents at 7% combined. But again, a long way to go when it comes to the U.S. Senate race. But we wanted to give you the latest numbers there. We also want to bring in our live shot here. We have Brad Rogers. He's reporting live from the Senator Susan Collins campaign up in Bangor. Brad.
Well, I'm sure Senator Collins is encouraged by those numbers, even though they are, as you say, early results. After 24 years in office, the senator is really fighting for her political life against Maine House Speaker Sarah Gideon. But you would never know it. She seemed quite relaxed here a short time ago, outside speaking with the reporters, thanking her supporters as well. She did also take a few jabs at Sarah Gideon as well, talking about all the outside money that, even though outside money poured in for both candidates, she talked about the outside money that was spent on Sarah Gideon, as she put it, to try to buy this Maine Senate seat. Of course, with all the negative ads, I'm sure the Mainers are eager to hear exactly who won this race, but in speaking with Secretary of State Matt Dunlap, he says it could take, if this comes to a ranked choice vote, it could take 1, 2, or even 3 weeks to declare a winner. Back to you.
It might be a long week, Brad. Thanks so much. We want to welcome our Fox viewers who are watching us on Fox 23 and send things over to CBS 13 and Fox 23's Marissa Bodner, who is joining us from the Sarah Gideon campaign. Marissa.
Yeah, Jen, we're here at the Westin in downtown Portland. This is where Gideon's campaign is tonight. We haven't heard from her yet, but we're told she is here. She's watching the returns with her family. They're just starting to trickle in. There's not a whole lot we can say about the results just yet. But this race is certainly in the spotlight. This is one of several seats Democrats are hoping to flip to take control of the Senate. A lot of money has poured into this Senate race, the most expensive in Maine's history. And Gideon really has proven to be the toughest challenger so far to Senator Susan Collins in her 24-year career. Collins won the last time back in 2014 with 68% of the vote. But judging by the polls, that's certainly unlikely tonight. They show a much tighter race. And as Brad mentioned, there is a chance this could go to ranked choice voting. There are 2 third-party candidates in this race. So that's something we're certainly going to be keeping a close eye on as these results start to come in. For now, I'll send it back to you guys.
Certainly could be a long night for the candidates, for our reporters, and for you, our viewers, as we wait for those results in the Senate race. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results so far when it comes to the congressional races. Let's start in the 2nd District now. The incumbent there, Jared Golden, is seeking his first re-election at this point. Very close in the very early returns. Democrat Jared Golden, 49%, his Republican challenger Dale Crafts, 51%. So very, very early, very close at this point. And again, we'll continue to track these results as we look at the 2nd District. The 1st District, obviously, Shelley Pingree seeking another term as well. That one not expected to be close, but we're still waiting for that to be officially called by the Associated Press. We'll continue to have updates here on CBS 13. In the meantime, we'll send it back to network coverage. And we continue our coverage here on Fox 23. Now, again, let's take a look at the latest numbers here. In the U.S. Senate race, as we mentioned a moment ago, Susan Collins seeking her 5th term in the U.S. Senate. By the way, no incumbent has lost a re-election bid in Maine in 42 years. It was 1978 when Bill Cohen won over William Hathaway. It's been that long since a U.S. Senator from Maine seeking re-election has lost. So we'll continue to track that tonight.
And these are just the very latest numbers coming in. It's really hard to tell from those numbers that we were just seeing, Greg, because so few precincts are reporting.
Small sample size, and it matters where those are coming from as far as what to read into those results.
Exactly. So we still have a long night ahead of us when it comes to counting all of those results. We do want to show you some of the votes in Portland that are happening. There are some ballot questions there, 6 referendum questions on the ballot.
Yeah, quickly, let's summarize what's going on. Question A, that's a one to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour over 3 years. That plan would also require, by the way, that employers pay time and a half during states of emergency, similar to what we're in now. Question B, that would ban the use of facial surveillance technology. Question C would enact a Green New Deal in the city, including tracking the use of fossil fuels, and require that apartment units be affordable in new developments as well.
And meanwhile, question D, that's about rent control. If it passes, landlords could only increase rent by a small amount every year. And question E, that seeks to restrict short-term rentals like Airbnb and Vrbo. Question F, that's the last one. It would remove a cap on marijuana stores and dispensaries and allow them to be within 100 feet of each other. We do want to go to our Blair Best, who is joining us live in Lewiston tonight. Blair.
And we understand we're actually a little bit out of time here. Our special coverage here on Fox 23. We'll get you to Blair in our coverage coming up in about a half an hour on Fox 23 News at 10. In the meantime, watching us on Fox 23, we'll see you then. And we're continuing our coverage here
I
live
do
on our website.
apologize because we were told to go to Blair, which I think we're going to now.
Yeah, there's Blair.
Blair
we were out
is-
of time in our live cut-in on Fox 23. That's why we had to abruptly punt from going to you, but we're going to you now.
That's
She
right,
is-
Jen. Now, we were just let inside Democratic and That's right, Jen. Now, we were just let inside here, Democratic incumbent Jared Golden's campaign headquarters in Lewiston. Now, originally, they had planned to hold a viewing party at a local brewery, but due to the rising COVID-19 cases, they decided to cancel those plans at the last minute. Now, Golden was first elected to Congress in 2018 when he flipped the seat to Democratic control by defeating Republican incumbent Bruce Poliquin. It was the first congressional election in our country's history that used ranked choice voting to decide the winner. This year, ranked choice voting won't play a role in this race since there are no third-party candidates. Now, it's important to note that the race for Maine's 2nd District will affect the partisan control of the U.S. House of Representatives. And according to a recent study, Democrats currently have a majority lead in the House seats that are up for election. Now, we are expecting to hear from Golden at some point tonight. Now, I just touched base with his campaign manager, and he does say it is way too early in the evening to even start speculating a winner. So we will continue to watch as results come in. For now, I will toss it back to you. Jen?
All right, Blair, thanks so much. A lot to watch in the 2nd District on many fronts.
Yeah, absolutely true. And continue our coverage of the 2nd District. Also in Lewiston, the Republican challenger Dale Crafts. He's been there with his supporters tonight. David Singer has been with their campaign as well tonight.
And David, I can't help but notice how different the Crafts campaign looks from the Golden campaign. A full room there behind you.
There is a full room, and there's a full room behind the camera here as well. People were at a buffet line, and it's a much more well-attended event by contrast. Now, also in attendance here, notably the previous challenger and occupant of the 2nd District, previously before he lost to Jared Golden, Bruce Poliquin is here. He took the stage a short time ago, promising that if Crafts wins, he'll introduce him to all his friends in D.C. Now, Crafts enters this race on election day notably behind in the polls at between 6 and 10 points, depending on which poll you look at. I asked Crafts how he felt about tonight.
We're excited. We really think we have a shot at it tonight, and we know the earlier polls, because polls sometimes, I don't know, something don't make any sense when you see a poll come out, and then we do our internal polls, which we hire professional pollsters, and the numbers are completely different. But we'll see. Tonight's tonight.
Now, President Trump has endorsed Crafts. He did so at the beginning of August, and he's been tweeting his support ever since, a few times also in support of him wanting to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Crafts also backs President Trump on a repeal of the ACA. Jen, Greg?
All right, we'll continue to follow that one as well. And again, as we mentioned, the 2nd District went to Donald Trump in 2016, the lone electoral vote that he picked up from Maine. The other 3 went to Hillary Clinton in 2016. And speaking of the electoral votes, let's get an updated look at that electoral map. Still no surprises, again, as we continue to track this. Both candidates winning the state so far, they were expected to win. The race in Florida officially still too close to call. There have been signs that it has been tilting towards Donald Trump, Florida that is. In fact, earlier, as we heard from our James Rosen, the Trump campaign is already declaring their victory in Florida. That's the Trump campaign declaring victory. As far as the AP and other news organizations declaring it and projecting it, that's not happened yet. Still too close to call there in Florida.
And we want to bring in our political analyst in the studio, Andy Rudalevich. Thanks so much for joining us, Andy.
Pleasure.
And what are you making of this evening and really this whole election cycle here?
Well, I think we're settling in for the long haul. The Florida results, again, that's a state that President Trump really needed to win. And again, his campaign at least. And, some of the analysis that's going on elsewhere suggests that he is well on his way to doing that. Georgia, North Carolina, states that he probably needs to win. He's ahead, though those results are hardly guaranteed. So we do seem to be kind of settling into a repeat a bit, maybe of 2016. And if that's the case, then we're going to be looking once again late at night or early in the morning or later in the week to results coming in from the upper Midwest. On the other hand, if you're the Biden campaign, they've basically they said about Florida, well, it's really close. We knew it would be really close, and the rest of the country doesn't look like Miami-Dade County in terms of the way that the Latino vote breaks down, especially with the large number of Cuban Americans in that county. So they are still, themselves expressing confidence that that they will live up to the polls, right? Because the polling averages generally have favored Joe Biden. The question will be, of course, we know in 2016 those polls underestimated support for President Trump. Did the pollsters get it right this time?
And it's interesting. We're joined by Andy Rudalevich, Bowdoin College professor of government and politics. And Andy, you're an author. You're an expert on presidential power and electoral politics. It's got to be difficult from an analyst perspective, though. Again, we're looking at like some of the very early numbers from Michigan. Have Trump up like 20 points. That can't be right in terms of what that's going to happen in that race. That doesn't mean Trump may not win Michigan, but is it hard this year because there are so many absentee votes? We're almost trying to figure out, okay, are they counting the absentee votes first, or are they counting the in-person votes first? Because it seems like the in-person votes may skew towards the Republicans and towards Trump, and the absentee ballots, just in terms of how the parties marketed those ways of voting this year, could tilt towards Biden. It seems to me it's difficult to read how these votes are being counted early on, at least.
Yeah, in a normal election, right, you'd be looking at what counties or precincts things are coming in from, as, the good folks at the Bangor Daily News are doing, as they look at Maine results, right, which are coming in quite slowly, trying to figure out where they're from. But again, as you say, this year we have the added layer of having to think about, well, were those votes cast early? Were they cast on Election Day? Some states, like New Hampshire, just kind of put them all together and announce them together. But other states do choose to announce, early votes first if they've had time to process them. That varies by state law. And then you have states, there are counties in Pennsylvania who have said they're not going to announce results. They're not even going to start counting votes that came in early until tomorrow, right? So those results could be quite skewed in favor of whatever the in-person vote looked like. As you say, President Trump has been pretty hostile towards the idea of mail-in voting, and that may affect the way that the count comes in.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how different states do it as well, because Maine began processing those absentee ballots, putting them at least in the machine, didn't start counting them until tonight, but some other states are not even processing them until tonight.
That's a great point. Maine has been allowed to process them for a week now, which made it faster, or in theory is going to make that faster tonight. But every state has had a little different when it comes to a rule on that.
Yeah, remember we've got really 51 separate elections going on in the 50 states and the District of Columbia. These are all administered slightly differently. The rules for how absentee ballots occur, what makes a ballot valid, all of these things differ somewhat, which is why people have been so nervous about the idea of litigation following on this election, right? Because there are so many specific issues that could arise in different states, especially if they're very close.
Great point. All right, Andy Rudalevich, the Bowdoin College professor of politics, the Thomas Brackett Reed Endowed Chair, professor of politics and government, I should mention. Thanks very much, Andy. And again, as I've been saying, don't go far. Here's some updated numbers when it comes to the U.S. Senate race, and this really hasn't moved so far. Again, we're getting some of the precincts in, as Andy and Jen and I were just talking about a moment ago. It's really hard to tell, again, which communities these are coming in from, and if it's absentee votes they're counting or it's in-person votes they're counting early. And this would, if they're counting in-person votes first, that might explain the disparity here. All the polls have suggested a very close race, but as you can see, at least at this moment, in this graphic, Susan Collins, seeking her fifth term, has a sizable lead at this quick moment snapshot in time.
And as we've been saying, those third-party candidates could play a role if it does become very close. Lisa Savage polling at 5%, Max Lynn at 2%. Again, if none of the candidates get to 50% of the vote, when all of the votes are counted, that's when it will head to a ranked choice vote. So this one may take a while for us to have a winner.
And it's important to mention real quickly as we stay on this graphic, Lisa Savage, of course, is the progressive candidate, progressive candidate in the race. And I think she's actively said, and her supporters have said, that if they're going to vote for Lisa Savage first, put Sarah Gideon second. Max Lynn, we're not really sure. He is a strong conservative. It's not really sure if he's had a message at all, whether he wants his voters, the 2% or so who may be voting for him, to put Susan Collins second, or if there's some hostility there to ranked choice voting, which maybe they put not even a second choice. So This is speculating a bit, but there's been some discussion about if Lisa Savage is the stronger of the independent/third-party candidates, that her voters might be more inclined to go to Sarah Gideon. But all these things are going to be played out if it does, in fact, go to ranked choice voting.
A lot more to come in this race. And let's send it over to John, who is joining us at the live desk with more on the questions that are on the ballot in Portland. And John.
Yeah, we know at this point, obviously, there are no statewide referendum questions on the ballot, but Portland is making up for that. There are 6 here in the city. We have no final results on those questions, but we are getting some idea with 7 of 11 precincts here in the city reporting results. We'll go through all 6 for you. Question A is the minimum wage question. It involves raising the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour over the next 3 years. That plan also would require employers to pay time and a half during states of emergency like a pandemic. At this point, voters in Portland are saying no to that. Again, 7 of 11 precincts reporting. Question B is on banning the use of facial surveillance technology by public officials. That is a yes at this point from Portland voters. Question C, that's the Green New Deal, which includes tracking the city's use of fossil fuels. It would also change some of the building standards for developers and require apartment units to be affordable. It would change those standards by developers. That is a no, again, at this point. Question D is on rent control. That is also a no at this point from Portland voters. If it were to pass, landlords could only increase rent by a small amount each year. But again, with 7 of those 11 precincts reporting in the city, that is a no as well. Question E seeks to restrict short-term rentals in Portland like Airbnb. Also a no at this point. And finally, question F would remove the cap on marijuana stores and dispensaries and allow them to be within 100 feet of each other. Portland voters are saying yes to that, with 7 of 11 precincts reporting. So again, these are not final results, but they are giving some idea of where Portland voters are coming in on this question. And we'll continue to keep an eye on those results as they're coming in. But again, no new precincts coming in at this point. 7 of 11 of the precincts here in the city. And it appears at this point that questions B, question 2, and question F, question 6, those are the only 2 yes votes at this point.
Yeah, interesting, John, on those. Again, a lot of these obviously were put forward by progressive coalitions there in Portland. I know the business community in Portland had expressed some reservations. Actually, we saw a fiscal note. John, you were the first one of those to report on this with the I-Team. The fiscal note that was attached to some of these, there was concerns of what the cost could be to the city and to taxpayers, which we should point out, as your report did, that supporters of these referendums said, no, that's not true. But there is some real concern in the business community about these votes tonight in Portland.
Yeah, there is, and there's been a lot of money that's been put behind some of the questions that we're seeing no votes on at this point. Those are the ones where developers and other groups have funded those campaigns. The question B and question F, we haven't seen as much lobbying and as much money behind those questions, but the other questions that are no's at this point, there was concern about what that would do to the Portland city budget. I believe the estimate was about $12 million potentially in increases to the Portland budget if those were to pass, just because development, the analysis noted, would have been more expensive. And we're being told now that we want to move on to the presidential map, the electoral map. So, Greg, I'll let you guys take this one away.
All right, John, I appreciate the updates, though, on what's happening in Portland, as I'm sure our viewers do as well. Here's the latest on the electoral map. As you can see, you don't need us to tell you this, but blue means Biden, red means Trump at this point. There have been 0 surprises so far. New Mexico, that's the blue in the lower left, that was expected to go to Biden. The neighboring state of Arizona is one that we are really watching tonight. That is one of maybe 8 or so states that's really close. And the neighboring state to the right, Texas. Obviously, that's been a red state for a long time. It appears to at least be in play tonight. We're unsure exactly whether it's going to go to Biden or Trump at this point, but the fact we're even mentioning it as a potential toss-up state tonight shows you that the electoral map, as our analyst Andy Rudalevich was mentioning, perhaps had some demographic changes, a larger number of Hispanic voters voting in Texas right now. And there's been some shift when it comes to educated white suburban voters, some who went for Trump in 2016. Some of the early polls suggested that they may at least some of them gravitating over towards Biden, and that's helped to put Texas potentially in play tonight, one of the states we're watching.
And these again are the projections by the Associated Press. As you can see, Biden with the slight edge tonight at 111.
Yeah, got to get to 270.
President at 82, so there's still quite a long way to go. And so again, these are projections by the Associated Press. We also want to look at the 1st Congressional District. We have the incumbent Democrat Shelley Pingree with 54% of the vote. Her challenger Jay Allen, the Republican, 46% of the vote. Only about 9% of the precincts reporting at this point. This was supposed to be almost a sure victory for Shelley Pingree.
I think that's fair to say, only because Shelley Pingree has won by resounding margins in each one of her re-election bids so far. And as we know, polls show and outcomes show that the 1st district is heavily Democratic. It's a blue district. So should Jay Allen pull off the upset tonight, it would be that. It would be a big upset. At this point, still too close to call right now. Shelley Pingree with the lead, as Jen mentioned, 9% of precincts reporting.
And as many people turned out to vote today, we were seeing voters of all ages casting their ballots. Our Lauren Healy spoke to one senior citizen about why voting is so important to her.
Hi, Holly. How are you? Fine.
No matter how old you are,
84.
You're never too old to have your voice heard.
I really think that I need to vote for the sake of my children and my grandchildren, and I have a couple of great-grandchildren, too.
And Yvonne Rona of Topsom knows that firsthand. She remembers her first time voting.
I remember I voted for Kennedy. I was born before Roosevelt went in, because I remember the war period and the Victory Gardens and the rations and things.
Rona says her favorite president was Franklin D. Roosevelt.
I loved Roosevelt. I mean, my parents loved Roosevelt, and I just think that man had a good common sense head on his shoulders, helping people during the Depression by making parks and building dams and doing various things that needed to be done.
And while she casted her ballot at Mount Ararat High School today,
You're all set. Thank you.
she wants to make sure everyone exercises their right too.
I think it's very important because our planet depends on having a good person to head our United States.
In Topsom, Lauren Healy, CBS 13 News.
And we're joined once again by a good friend from the BDN, the politics editor, Michael Shepard, who's joining us tonight. Jen, he's one of our analysts, one of our guests who's been talking to us throughout the evening tonight.
Yes, we love seeing you, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us. And, you know, today and really throughout the past few weeks, we've been talking about just how many people are turning out to vote. And it seems very significant this year.
Yeah, I mean, but up to yesterday, we had 500,000 people alone cast absentee ballots. We're poised to go over, I think, our all-time record, which was set in 2016 of about 747,000. So we don't know exactly what that final number will be, but earlier in the day, you know, it certainly looked like 800,000 was not out of the question, and that would be about 80% of the registered voters here. So that's a huge number, and I mean, some towns we're talking 90% turnout. So this is quite remarkable.
And it was absentee and early voting even before today. So it'll be interesting to see what the numbers come back, including the voters today.
Yeah, I know we're in a pandemic, but the fact that we got to over 50% of expected registered voters to vote before the election, that's stunning. If this stays, and who knows, many things that are, as we evolve our lives here in the pandemic, I think some of these trends that we're adapting because we have to in 2020, we can see stick. And Michael, I don't know if you agree, but this sort of early voting, absentee voting, I think it's one that could stick.
Yeah, I think that's certainly right. And Maine has always been a high turnout state. You know, it's been Maine and Minnesota for years that always lead the lists of, of voters that turn out. But I do think that absentee voting is, it's certainly been a big part of our voting before, but I think it's going to be here to stay as we go forward here. It's more convenient for folks. And, especially in a year like this, you see how important it was to people. And, all that is to say, we still saw, lots of people waiting to get through the polls today. And, lines may have looked longer in certain places because they were more spaced out. But things seem to go relatively smoothly today. We had barely any reports of major issues. Pretty smooth day overall. So I think Maine can kind of pat itself on the back today.
I would agree, absolutely. Real quickly, Michael, I'm not going to ask you necessarily to comment on this, but some quick breaking news. The AP has called the Colorado Senate race for John Hickenlooper. Not necessarily a big surprise because of the way the polls were shaking out, but as we analyze who could take over and control the U.S. Senate, that is certainly one of the seats the Democrats are hoping to pick up. So there's one, which puts even more scrutiny perhaps on the Collins-Gideon race.
Yeah, that one's one of the more expected flips, and it's been relatively clear for a while. But that's one of the big results so far. Florida remains too close to call for some people, although our partners at Decision Desks have called it for Decision Desk HQ have called it for Trump. So, not too much to see in these early results here in Maine, but we're seeing some shoes drop across the country.
Yeah, we sure are. And like you, we'll be watching it throughout the night. It could be a long night for Michael Shepard, a long night for Jen and Greg as well. I suspect it will be in our entire team behind the scenes here as well. Hey, Michael, thanks so much. And again, we hope to join you again here throughout the evening, but thanks so much, Michael. And again, the BDN, check out their website too. Polls did close in New Hampshire. Over in New Hampshire, our neighbors, about almost 3 hours ago now. They closed at 7 o'clock there. And looking at the race for the White House in New Hampshire, one of the swing states now, Hillary Clinton narrowly carried New Hampshire. And by the way, it was sort of a thorn in the side of Donald Trump. He had vocally said he wanted to win New Hampshire. Of course, New Hampshire was it gave him his first ever electoral victory in the 2016 New Hampshire primary. And he wanted to win it. He narrowly lost it in 2016.
He's brought it up a few times since.
He certainly has. And
so obviously with 28% of the precincts reporting, there's still a little ways to go here, but Joe Biden with the edge with 54%. Also in the Granite State, we have the race for the Senate. And this one, really no surprise here. The incumbent, Jeanne Shaheen, who has been in office for quite some time, seeking her third term in Washington, is the projected winner. She has 58% of the vote. The Republican, Quirky Messner, and the Libertarian, Justin O'Donnell, coming in quite far behind her.
Yeah, and Republican Governor Chris Sununu, he's seeking his second term in office. He's the projected winner at this point. This is really not a surprise. So Chris Sununu, you're a winner for the New Hampshire race for governor, winning his second term as well. Let's go ahead and turn back to our political analyst, Andy Rudalevich. And Andy, I know that you've been watching a number of things here for us tonight. One of them is Ohio. And early on, there was some signs that Ohio was maybe going to be one of the states that Biden could take, and that would be a huge win for him on the electoral map. But you're seeing some numbers that are just coming in, and we should put a caveat, still way too close to call. What are you seeing in Ohio right now?
Well, it's very tight in Ohio, and the Biden camp is outperforming certainly the Clinton campaign from 2016, but it's doing well in some of the suburban counties that broke for President Trump by as much as 15, 16 points back in 2016. At least, again, there's plenty of vote to come in. But the Biden camp was fighting Trump to a draw in some of those counties, as the numbers are coming in. So it is that could be a rate. If Ohio were to go to Biden, that would be a huge blow to President Trump's reelectoral chances. Even if he wins Ohio by a narrow margin, that might suggest that the polling numbers in the Midwest are pretty accurate. That's sort of where people expected it to go. If he wins by 1.5%, 2%, that might be a good sign, ironically, for Biden in places like Pennsylvania or Michigan, where, again, Biden is very much hoping that the polls were accurate. They don't seem to have been very accurate in Florida, so the question is how much can we extrapolate from that to some other states? And of course, the Senate, too, is very much in play. You just mentioned John Hickenlooper in Colorado. If we assume that the Democrats will lose their seat in Alabama, then we're kind of starting at even, and the Democrats need to gain, probably in Arizona and in Maine, of course.
Stand by, Andy. We got to go live on CBS for a cut-in. Stand by.
Good evening and welcome to our CBS 13 studio. I'm Jen Long.
And I'm Greg Lagerquist with another CBS 13 election update. We're keeping a very close eye on these local races happening in Maine right now, including the federal races. Let's take a look right now. The first congressional district at this point Shelley Pingree seeking, I believe at this point, her 5th term in office, actually more than that at this point. Shelley Pingree, this would be a major upset if Dr. Jay Allen were to pull this one off. At this point, with only about 10% of the precincts reporting Shelley Pingree holding a lead, but at this point, we're not quite ready to call this projected one way or the other.
Meanwhile, in Maine's 2nd congressional district, the incumbent Democrat Jared Golden facing his challenger, the Republican Dale Crafts. At this point, with 13% of the precincts reporting, the challenger, Dale Crafts, is ahead with 51% of the vote. Golden right behind that at 49% of the vote. You'll remember Jared Golden took this seat from Bruce Poliquin 2 years ago in what ended up being a ranked choice vote.
Yeah, that was really close. And it actually, again, once all the votes were counted through ranked choice, Jared Golden was able to pull it off. Let's go ahead and turn our team coverage now on that race, the 2nd district. Let's start with CBS 13's Blair Best. She's joining us now live from the Jared Golden campaign up in Lewiston tonight. Very much. Go to you, Blair.
That's right, Greg. Now we're inside Democratic incumbent Jared Golden's campaign headquarters here in Lewiston. Now, originally, they had planned to hold a viewing party at a local brewery, but due to the rising COVID-19 cases, they decided to cancel those plans at the last minute. Now, we are expecting to hear from Golden at some point tonight. I just checked in with his campaign manager, who tells me that it is too early in the evening to start speculating a winner. So we will continue to watch as the results come in and keep you updated throughout the night. Greg, Jen.
Blair, thank you. And we do want to head over to CBS 13's David Singer. He is joining us live from the Republican candidate Dale Crafts' campaign. And David, what can you tell us about what's happening there?
Well, Jen, good evening. We're joining you from the Ramada Inn Conference Center here in Lewiston, which is also, in addition to the campaign HQ for Dale Crafts, it's also the Trump campaign HQ, at least on the extension on the behalf of the Maine GOP. This is where all of the watch party is happening here on their behalf. Now, also, you mentioned Bruce Poliquin, the former incumbent and challenger who lost to Jared Golden last time. He is here throwing his support behind Dale Crafts and saying if he wins, he'll take him to D.C. and introduce him to all of his friends there. Now, as far as the spread on this race, it's neck and neck right now with those early returns. I asked Dale Crafts about that. He is behind in polling. He was coming into Election Day. He says his own internal polls are showing him with much different numbers. And he says to be cautious about those polls. He's optimistic tonight regarding any discrepancies in fundraising. He says it comes down to the candidate. And as far as a candidate, he has the backing of President Trump, endorsing him late in the summer, and he's been tweeting his support for Dale Crafts. We'll learn more as the night carries on. Jen, Greg?
All right, David, again, the 2nd district update. A reminder, voters in Raymond, one of the local issues, they were asked if they want to withdraw from RSU 14 and have a standalone kindergarten to 8th grade school district. We have coverage on that. Too early, we have no numbers quite yet on that question.
And another question that we're keeping an eye on is in Dixfield. People in town are trying to decide whether or not they should disband the police department and rely on the sheriff's department. Again, something else we're covering tonight. A quick look now at the presidential race. It looks like Joe Biden is in the lead with 111 of the electoral votes. And still a long ways to go.
So long. Again, we're watching Florida, Ohio, even Texas in play at the moment. Our full coverage will continue here on CBS 13. In the meantime, we'll see you at 11 o'clock. We'll send it back to network coverage.